tutorial, I'm going to share with you my top essential pieces of equipment and tools for making sugar flowers. So to get going, first of all, we're going to start with flower paste. So there are lots of different brands on the market now. I tend to switch between brands depending upon what flower I'm making and what properties the paste has, because they're all slightly different. So it's well worth, like I've done here, ordering some small packs of some that you've perhaps not tried before and giving them a go and understanding what particular specific properties that brand has, and therefore what it might lend itself to. So sometimes you want things to set quite quickly. The Squires one is brilliant for that. Sometimes you want more time to work with the paste, more time before it sets to manipulate the petal shapes and to work on your flower, in which case you might want to try a different brand. So familiarize yourself with the different brands. They come in all sorts of different colors as well. So these ones are all white, but you can add gel colors to them, but you can also buy them pre-colored. Okay, the second essential tool is florist wire. So you can buy these online from all cake decorating stores. They come in different gauges, different thicknesses, and different colours as well, but they're basically paper covered wires, and they are to enable you to wire your flowers so that you can attach them to your cakes. So the different thicknesses, I tend to use the thicker ones here, which are the lower numbers. So things like an 18 or a 20 gauge will be the thicker ones, and they're really good for securing the centres and for being the stems of flowers. The thinner ones here, so like 26, 28 gauge, which you can see are a lot more flimsy and bendy, will be ones that perhaps you insert into individual petals and then tape together to create a flower. So the higher the number, the thinner the gauge. I tend to buy mine in green and white, and then I will use florist tape to tape them all together, which I'll show you now. So florist tape is paper tape with adhesive on the back. The adhesive, it's not really tacky, but you activate it while you stretch the tape. So when you stretch the tape, when it comes off the roll like this, it will activate that glue on the back, and then you can use it to tape your wires. And because this is sort of paper tape, you can also use petal dust to dust this tape as well. If you don't want this particular green, you can change it by adding some petal dust on at the end to get a more custom colour. It comes in full width and half width tape. It comes in all different colours. So again, a little goes a long way, so you can build up your collection relatively inexpensively with tapes. Next up on the list is a good pair of wire cutters, particularly for those thicker wires. A normal pair of scissors may well get blunted from them. So a good set of wire cutters that's going to cut through even the thicker wires is always to hand for me. These ones are the Oasis brand that's designed specifically for florists, because they also use florist wire, obviously. And I have several of these always knocking around. Okay, next up is cell cones or cell buds. So these are polystyrene cones for the centre. So these I use for roses, these particular ones, but they come in spheres and half spheres as well. And basically one of the thicker wires that we had before, you can see here I've popped through the cone and then secured at the base to then create a wired centre for my rose petals to then form around. These create a centre that's a really nice secure centre for your petals to go around without adding too much weight, because these are super light. You can make obviously your centre cones out of flower paste. Make sure you give them a good couple of days to fully set after you've formed them onto your wire, or your cocktail stick if you prefer to use cocktail sticks rather than wires. But you make sure you give them a good couple of days to properly firm up, so they're not going to move around on the wire or cocktail stick once you start putting the additional weight of petals on. Obviously also, if you're using flower paste to form your centre cones, then that is additional weight as well, so please bear that in mind when you're planning your project. Okay, next on the list is stamen. So you can absolutely make your own stamen for your flowers. Not every flower requires stamen, but certain ones cannot be done without them. So you can make your own, but it is obviously quite time consuming because they're teeny tiny. And yeah, it's just a real time saver if you can have a stock of them to hand. They come in all different sizes, colours. Some are round headed, some are pointy headed, some are much bigger. Really to give you a range of flowers to work with. And again, you can customize the color of these by just sort of adding some dust or edible paint on there. You can change the colors to whatever you need. Okay, a couple of things in this one. So I've got a cell board here. They come in all different shapes and sizes with different size veins on. So this is to create the veins on the back of your wired petals or leaves. I've done a separate YouTube tutorial that's already gone live on my channel to show you how this works. So if you're looking at this and wondering what on earth it is, make sure you go check that out because I've done a demo of that already. But definitely a handy piece of kit and relatively inexpensive. In addition to that, I have a Stay Fresh mat. I actually have quite a few of these and they're just sort of pockets. If you're cutting out lots of petals at once, then you can roll out a big piece of paste, cut out all your petals and pop it in this Stay Fresh mat and pull out a few at a time to work on the mat without them all being sat out on the side drying out before you're ready to actually work on them. So again, relatively inexpensive, but something that you will use time and time again. Okay, next up on the list, I've got quite a few different things here, so let me just grab them. Okay, so lots of little tools that I use time and time again. So I've got my cornflower pouch, so a little dusting pouch to stop paste sticking to things as I'm working on it. And yeah, always have that to hand with a little bit of cornflour in, super handy. Especially if you've got quite hot hands, because quite often you feel like your hands are getting a little bit sticky and you need to just kind of dry them off with a little bit of cornflour and it stops your hands sticking to things. Next up is a small rolling pin. So I always say choose the tools that are appropriate for the size of the project you're working on. This is just a little 6-inch rolling pin, acrylic pin that is super handy to just pop in my toolkit. I've got a couple of them hanging around, so one in my drawer, one in my toolkit, just always have them to hand. These are cell pins, you can get them in different sizes. So these bigger ones you can actually use to roll paste out as a little rolling pin if you've not got your pin to hand, which are really handy. You can use these on super tiny projects, but also lovely little pointed ends on both to do detail work or to sort of get in places where your fingers might be a bit clumsy to get into. And the other ends can be used to thin out the edges of petals, much like a ball tool, which we'll come on to now. So this is a ball tool. Again, you can get different size balls on the end. You can get plastic ones, metal ones, all different brands. Just get one I quite like this one because I've got quite small hands and it doesn't feel too cumbersome for me to be holding and doing lots of work with. But again, definitely have a couple of different sizes if you can, just because as you get to come to work on bigger petals, bigger size petals or leaves, a bigger ball on the end of your ball tool is much more appropriate than these smaller ones here. But for things like rose petals and stuff, these are brilliant. Next up is my trusty Dresden tool. So I have this one here, which is from PME, which some of you will already probably have in if you've bought like a PME kit of tools, the yellow and white tools like this, but you might not know what it is. So the pointy end is brilliant, particularly a bit similar to the cell pins for sort of lifting things out of veinas that might have kind of got stuck into a petal that might have got stuck into a veina. Rather than going in and digging it out with your fingers, you can just gently lift the edge up a little bit and then remove. And the other end is brilliant for shaping petals and adding some extra movement and texture in. So always have this around. It's also brilliant for arranging sugar flowers. Again, if you've got wired flowers and you just want to get in somewhere and gently move something, in the arrangement, but your fingers are going to be a bit too clumsy and may well do some damage. Just having your Dresden tool to hand can just kind of get in where your fingers are a bit too big to do that without causing any damage. And also needle nose pliers. So this is brilliant for if you are holding the stem of a flower and positioning it into a cake. Again, in between things where your fingers can't get, just getting the needle nose pliers in there gives you better control and less risk of doing any damage. The pliers are also really great for shaping wires as well, so I'll show you that now. So for some flowers, we need a hooked end to the wire to go into the paste. So these pliers are basically what I use for that. So we just grab the end of the wire there, curl it round and create a little hook on the end of your wire, which again, your fingers would not have been able to do. And finally, for this little section, edible glue. So I don't use a huge amount of edible glue, but when you're making non-wired flowers, so for example, on the cell cone, if you created a center cone with a cell pin and there's just one single wire and the rest of the petals are unwired, you're going to be attaching those petals to this cone and to each other as you build it up with edible glue. And with that, you want a small brush that is suitable for the size of project that you are working on. Okay, next up is foam mats. So I tend to use this kind of white foam mat. Also comes in a smaller version, but I quite like the space the bigger version gives me to basically work on all my petals. So for example, if we have a petal here, we can use this or the ball tool to thin the edges and to create movement without the petal becoming damaged. So this is what the foam mat is for. I also have this Mexican hat foam mat. Again, it might come in a blue version paired with the white mats. This is a different brand though. It just has different size holes in the mat, and that's for using with the Mexican hat method. I actually have a tutorial. If you look at this Spring Blossoms tutorial on my YouTube channel, I have demonstrated using this for those. And then the dimpled foam mat. So the dimpled foam is basically for drying out flower petals or leaves. I tend to use this for foliage more than flower petals, unless you're making tiny little blossoms. And it can just help, for example, if you've got little blossoms, you just pop one in each dimple and it creates a nice little curved shape to it while it sets. Or if you're creating lots of leaves, you can just position them randomly and they will all create different shapes to every single leaf. Just leave that to set overnight and then you can then finish off your leaves with dusting and glazing, etc. But I usually have quite a stack of these around on some racking, and they're usually during wedding season covered with all different things, all different stages, ready to go. Okay, to follow on from that, I also have a selection of fruit trays with different depths and angles on them. So these I've just picked up from the local supermarket. Just pop along and if there's any empty, just ask whoever's working in that department if you can take it, give them a quick clean. And these I will dry petals in. So for example, if you're wanting a curved shape to your petal, you can dry them in a fruit tray like that, and then it will have this lovely consistent, every petal will have a lovely consistent curve to it. So for things like peonies, where you really want to create that lovely ball shape, these are brilliant for that. Okay, so this is quite a big one because investment wise, this can be huge. So cutters and veiners, there are so many on the market these days, and varying degrees of quality, varying degrees of interpretation of the actual flower, and varying price. So what I would always recommend is that you buy the best quality that you can afford and just start building up your collection, because you can spend a fortune on them. If you are buying silicone veiners, try and buy the two-sided veiners, so where two parts stick together. And the front isn't just a copy of the back, a reverse of the back, for example. And I would suggest trying to sort of use things for multiple purposes if you can. So without being overly prescriptive over everything, try and always look to what you've got that could be modified or could be used for a different flower or a different leaf. So I think having like a larger size leaf veiner is brilliant because you can use it for multiple sizes, for smaller sizes as well. But get a veiner that you really like and make sure, you know, you can then use it for multiple leaves without being too botanically correct. But yeah, there are loads of different ones out there. So again, just, you know, work within the price point that you've got for your budget. Having a really good rose petal veiner is a definite one because there's so many different roses. And again, you can buy all the different veiners for all the different rose species, but you don't necessarily need to. So just always have a look at what you've already got that could be modified. Without having to get the specific veiner for that specific flower, unless it just can't, you know, unless it's so different that it can't be sort of mimicked by any other veiner. Cutters wise, again, some of them are really affordable and inexpensive, like these plastic ones here from, I think, a PME. Hang on. No, FMM. So this is the cutter set that I often use for my standard rose flowers, and really inexpensive. The plastic ones tend to be cheaper than the metal ones, but the metal ones do give a really nice crisp cut typically, and you can also, with the metal ones, you can change the shape of them, so they do become a little bit more flexible in terms of using them for different projects, because if you wanted to manipulate the shape of them, so make them a bit narrower and longer, you can do that yourself just by sort of reshaping them, squeezing them, and changing the shape slightly. I won't do that with that one right now because I use that as that shape, but yeah, you can obviously with the metal ones, whether it's leaves or petal cutters, manipulate the shaping of them a little bit, and obviously you can't do that with the plastic ones. But I would say just try to resist going crazy with them, and always, because it is an investment, and try to just buy the best ones that you can afford, and you can always upgrade them. So I've been making flowers for 10 years and I've still got all my cutters and veiners, but for some I've got the original ones I bought, and then I've upgraded with perhaps something that's given me a nicer finish or a more detailed vein, for example, as I've got further along. So you can always do that too. One of the last steps that I do with my flowers and leaves is to finish them off with petal dust. And this really gives them an extra dimension. So petal dust, there's loads of different brands, it's sometimes called craft dust, loads of different brands and colours, like amazing ranges of colours out there. But make sure whatever country you're in that you're using the colours that are approved in your country. And they're just sort of different dust colours that you can get, that you can add that extra dimension, really pick out those beautiful veins. They come in, these are quite muted ones that I just quickly grabbed, but they come in really vibrant colours as well. So yeah, different brands, different pot shapes and sizes, and yeah, you can build up quite the collection, but just make sure you're using the ones that are approved for the country that you're working in, because every country has sort of slightly different regulations as to colourings and approvals and things like that. Typically I don't steam or glaze my flowers, but I know some people that do. So particularly if you're adding a lot of petal dust, you may well want to steam your flowers. So you can do that just over a boiling kettle, or a nice little piece of kit to invest in is a portable steamer. This one's from PME. I think it's about £25–30, but then there are also different brands out there as well now. It's just really handy to have. But you can do it over a pan of boiling water. Obviously, just be really careful not to scald yourself, and again, the same over the kettle. And then, so I do steam my leaves because I do put obviously quite a lot of dark colour on some of my leaves, and I don't want any of that petal dust when I'm arranging it onto a cake to sort of any of those dusts to sort of fall off onto the beautiful icing. So if you're worried about that, if you're putting particularly deep or vibrant colours onto your flowers, you might just want to give them a very light steam, not to give them any glossiness, so really subtle steam. You don't want the flour to absorb lots of moisture because it will soften again, but just to really set the dust so that it's no longer free to fall onto your cake. And then finally you can add some confectioner's glaze or confectioner's varnish, which does what it says on the tin, will add a glossiness, a waxiness to the finish. So I tend to use this pretty much just for foliage, but there may be some floral elements that you want a little bit of glossiness to, maybe some centers or anything like that you want some glossiness or waxiness to, where this would come in handy to give you that effect as well. So there you have it. That's a run through of all the things that I tend to use to make sugar flowers, the things that I would use pretty much every time when I'm working on a floral project, and always have quickly to hand to grab as I'm making flowers or foliage. I would say it is an investment, particularly with the cutters and veiners, so don't feel like you need to buy everything at once. You know, you don't need to buy a steamer to begin with. You can get the flower formers free from the supermarket or your local vegetable market stall, and you can just build up your kit gradually. But there's definitely some of my essential tools and little bits of equipment that I tend to use every time. So I hope that's been useful. If you have any questions at all, please pop them in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe.